Welcome back to part 2 of this amazing episode. We are joined again by Katherine and Stephanie here to just continue this amazing discussion. I don't know if you all were aware of this, but I wasn't, that more than 15 million children in the United States live in homes in which domestic violence has happened at least once. And these children are at greater risk for either repeating the cycle in a way of becoming a victim or victimizing themselves. They're also more likely, those children who have witnessed or experienced firsthand domestic violence, abuse, emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, are at higher risk for health problems when they become adults. And that can manifest itself in various ways, from mental health conditions, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, poor self-esteem. I'm sure the list goes on. So, Katherine, you're not quite there to to experience that. But Stephanie, did you, or Mom, did you experience any or witness any domestic violence in your home when you were growing up that now have manifested themselves physically that you can pinpoint?
I think for me, I think the battle with depression, over, because the home I grew up in, my mom was pretty abusive, and with regards to my stepfather, she was the abuser to him. And so witnessing it from that perspective, and not, and seeing that dysfunction, I think, caused a lot of sad days, a lot of days where you just kind of go inward, which can be a dangerous place if you don't have good language that you're, telling yourself. And I think that that the long-term effect is a battle with depression, because there'll be certain things that somebody can do or say that's triggering, and you don't even realize that it's triggering you, but your emotions recognize it and will take you back to feeling that vulnerability or that that weakness, or that, that feeling of despair. And I think that for me, I can relate to it in that way, and that's how it shows up. And so that's depression is kind of a lifelong battle, and there's always going to be something that's going to trigger. But I think having awareness of that and where it comes from and being able to put it in the proper perspective, I think is beneficial. How about you, Stephanie?
I think for me, I can have debilitating anxiety to the point where I will literally wake up, and it actually happened this morning. I almost wake up in a state of panic, and it's irrational. I have to talk myself off the cliff, but it is a constant in pretty much in my life. It's miserable. There doesn't seem to be a fix. Now I can manage it through exercise and, affirmations, or, spiritual readings, but it's a constant thing. And I've almost have a resolve that it is something I'm going to have to deal with for the rest of my life. I don't know if it comes from my childhood or if it comes from the aftermath of the shooting and the pressures of raising 4 kids, having 4 kids between the ages of 6 and 16. And, what are we going to do next? I don't know where it stems from, but it's problematic. The other piece of that is that last December 2nd, it was a Friday afternoon. I received a call from my doctor that, I had a mammogram and a biopsy, and the results were back, and I had breast cancer. And so in January, I underwent a double mastectomy, and they caught it very early. I don't need chemo or radiation. Again, very, very thankful. But it's so fascinating to me that when you read all of these things about breast cancer, stress is, you want to avoid stress.
Mhm.
Cancer loves stress. It loves sugar and it loves stress. And so I know there's no definitive proof that this kind of trauma is a cause of breast cancer, but I think there's enough documented research that there is some sort of a correlation.
There has to be. I mean, I from what I've known or what I've learned in my studies, becoming a therapist, trauma lives in your body, and it
Yes, I
can
believe that.
manifest as disease, dis-ease. So thank you for pointing that out. I'm very thankful that you're disease free. So
Thank you. But I was like, are you flipping kidding me? Okay. I'm gonna bring this up because one of the things that's so important for people that go through trauma, families that go through trauma, is to maintain a sense of humor. And I think Kat will agree with me. We tend to have somewhat of an irreverent sense of humor. I live in Texas and we've had a lot of storms this season. And there was a situation where all the power was out. I was hunkered down in the closet with the dog and a candle. And I called the kids. Nobody picked up. And I sent a text. I'm like, okay, I might die tomorrow because of this storm, but okay, love you all. It's been a fun ride, or something along those lines. And my son texts back and he said, Mom, you've been shot and you've had cancer. If that doesn't kill you, a little wind isn't going to, right? So I'm like,
Perspective, right?
It's perspective, but
Perspective. Yeah.
right, so.
Well, speaking of cancer, my beautiful daughter Constance was diagnosed with colon cancer.
Oh,
and had to have a foot of her colon removed.
right.
And she's, they caught it early enough. And
Good.
Yeah, but I would say that it was related to stress. I mean, I can't, of course, prove it, but at the time when that was occurring, it was a very, very stressful time in my life. And so if you don't have a way to release that stuff, especially the way you were speaking about your anxiety and how your experiences, that trauma that you've experienced stored in your body, you don't have a way to release that, then it can manifest in that sort of thing. It can manifest as, heart disease or something like that. So any listeners or viewers out there, it is definitely important that you work to keep your stress level down. You try to move your body to get some of that out, maybe talk to a somatic therapist and work through that.
Absolutely.
I wanted to move on to a term that I had never, ever heard of. And this is from the National Domestic Violence Hotline, which is for short, they call it the hotline.org, which a lot of our information comes from as well. But the term is cultural context shock and denial. And this is a state of disbelief and numbed feelings. It says that cultural context can play a large role in a survivor's decision to leave an abusive relationship. The specific cultural settings may be determined by your race, gender, sexuality, class, education, or any number of factors. What do you all think about that? That was quite interesting and eye-opening.
Well, I have two totally different points with respect to that topic. My husband grew up in a culture where misogyny and abuse was prevalent. And he was Nigerian. And, it was a very male-dominated society. And he used to be very braggadocious about the fact that he didn't abuse me, he didn't hit me. And that he had come so far by being, adopting American culture that he was so proud of himself that he wasn't abusive. I also, back to my childhood, my father was CEO of the women's shelter in St. Louis, Missouri. He was a banker by trade, and he somehow got involved in working with abused women in the St. Louis area.
Hmm.
But on that day, the only definition of abuse was physical abuse. So you have that context of, I mean, I grew up knowing you're not supposed to hit your wife, right? I mean, it was my father's philanthropic efforts were to that cause. And my husband also spoke to that regularly. But now we've evolved as a society, and culturally, we've accepted that there's so many more forms of abuse, whether it's financial, emotional, and now there's even spiritual abuse, which is a new point of discovery where people use biblical references to, out of context usually, but to keep their wife in check, right? To control their partner. So I think that's one facet of this that's, a part of that definition. The other piece of that is that after the aftermath of what happened to us, I didn't think there were any other women like me.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a professional, I'm educated. Abuse happens to those people over there. It's the not in my backyard syndrome, right?
Right.
And when I moved to Dallas, I mean, I've always been very transparent about our family story. You can Google it, you can find it. I think the shooting took place at 4:00. We were on the 5:00 news in Champaign, Illinois. So I never had the luxury of being private about our family turmoil. So I've always been very transparent. And what I found so fascinating is that in every professional role I had after moving to Dallas, I had a woman in the workplace come up and say, "This happened to me too, but don't tell anybody." So I've kind of realized that the void is in the profession, was with professional educated women, because there's so much more blame. We know better. We are embarrassed. And therefore, we as women do ourselves a disservice in this, it's a little bit more nuanced when it is the suburban wife, the corporate woman, because we feel that we're going to be judged that much more harshly. We're the last ones to go reach out for help and to reach out and take advantage of the resources that are available. So I think that is one of those cultural phenomenons that really hurt us as women. And I think one of my missions, I've got a couple, but one of them is that I don't look like the poster child of an abused spouse. And so if more women are transparent about their stories, and it truly is 1 in 4, or in Texas, 1 in 3, I don't really care what the statistic is. We all know 3, 4, or 5 women. One of them statistically is an abused woman. So if we are more transparent about our journey, then we expose it. And then I think people will behave better because there's checks and balances. We'll keep one another in check.
Exactly. And
we're almost normalizing the fact that there's so many of us out there, and that we have our own support system by default.
I think that we tend to take ownership of the shame. And and one of the phrases that I've kind of coined is, he who owns the blame owns the shame. So that's where it needs to live. It shouldn't live with us. And that's it's a hard place to because you're contending with the reaction of the people who you tell and who find out about it, and their perception of you. And I think that that's one of the that was one of the things that I think I've had difficulty with early on, and getting to a place where I like to say, nobody has a heaven or hell to put me in but God. And so so what anybody else thinks is they have a right to their opinion, they have a right to their truth, but I have a right to my truth as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, we teach our children that they're not supposed to touch their classmates in kindergarten on the playground.
Mhm.
Mhm.
That is a draw a line in the sand lesson
Mhm. Mhm.
that we raise all of our children with, right?
Mhm.
So why is it okay, or why do we have shame and embarrassment if somebody hits us? I mean, it's 2023. You're not supposed to hit your spouse, let alone
Right.
shoot your spouse, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and when people say, well, what did you do to cause it? You know, I've
Yeah.
had plenty of those questions thrown at me too. I'm like, it doesn't matter. You don't touch one another. You don't let your children do it. So why is it okay for this to happen
Yes.
in a relationship? I don't understand the disconnect there. It's very illogical to me.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think generationally too, Mom, you spoke before of, grandma's response to the abuse, or Stephanie, your husband's family talking about, well, just stay with them, this and that. I'm almost certain that a lot of it is generational as well. And, the newer generations are seeking out therapy more, pushing, more autonomy of certain things and taking ownership of when you hurt someone, acknowledging it, and that whole emotional intelligence thing. A lot more people are getting hip to that, I sounded so old just then, hip.
You did not sound old.
My 40 is show. I'm not 40 yet. I'll be 40 in a few months, but it definitely felt like it was showing just then.
I think that's the mama in you too. But no, I agree. I'm Constance is one of my 4 children, and the twins are 27, and my son will soon be 26, and the way that they approach really life and situations, I'm like so proud of it. You know what I mean? And it's like, wow, they escaped this, this parent ride pretty okay. You know what I mean? It's, and the way that they're just the way that Katherine, your generation is so open and so willing to just say the thing. You know what I mean? And to me, it makes me feel like this, y'all's generation, really starting with Constance's generation, but y'all's generation is like gives hope that, that things like this don't continue to happen. And honestly, I think that because of the paradigm shift in the way that things are viewed now, I think gives parents that are our age the bravery and the confidence to speak out. And I think that in speaking out, that's the way that we break these cycles, is in being open and honest. And I'm honest to goodness. I mean, I've had 80-year-olds, talk about their abusive past. And it's just because, the culture is changing, and we're being more open. And that's, that's the way to kind of shine light on these things and make it not so okay. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate y'all's generation. And you could.
And one thing too that I've just noticed about myself is I'm not shy about what happened in my family at all. But I always tend to make sure that the people around me know me before they know anything about my family. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of that, it doesn't come from a place of shame necessarily, but growing up in suburban Texas and, just a little suburban town of Dallas, there were a lot of instances where I would tell people about what happened and it would immediately be used against me. Mm-hmm. They got very, very, very bad in middle school. I mean, the things that some of these kids said to me were just horrible. I mean, you're never going to amount to anything. Your dad didn't love you. That's why he killed himself. Like horrible, horrible things. And I think I recognized that. And at 6th grade, 7th grade, I was like, okay, well, I told these kids and they have completely used this against me. And so coming to college, you know, nobody really knows anything about me. I'm in Alabama. I'm from Texas. And I just was always very conscious of making sure everybody has an opinion on me first, and then they can know what happened. Like, especially after winning Miss Texas Outstanding Teen or Miss Texas Teen, I won on the platform of Break the Cycle of Abuse. And I went back to school my senior year of high school, and everybody knew I had won Miss Texas Teen, but they didn't really know, like, you advocate for anything. And they didn't know a lot about my family. The people who were close to me did, but most people in my school had no idea. And so they all had this opinion of me already. And that is what I wanted. And then my school district ended up making a video talking about me winning Miss Texas Teen and my family history and all of that. And that went to the whole administration, that went to everywhere. And that was a very cool thing because the people who already had thoughts about me, they were able to see, oh my gosh, like Kat is nice, like she's cool, but she's overcome all of this too. And that has been a perspective that I've taken with me to anything, you know, especially coming to a school like Alabama, and being an ambassador to the school. I don't want to be defined by something that happened in my past, but I don't hide from it, but I don't particularly broadcast it until people know, like, I am double majoring. I'm involved in my school and I'm doing well here. And on top of all of that, this also happened to me. So that's been kind of my perspective. And, you know, my mom and I used to kind of butt heads a little bit because she's so open about everything. And particularly in high school, you know, we've got all this horrible sense of humor sometimes. And, you know, she would make a joke in front of my friends, and my friend would kind of look at me and be like, what is she talking about? Like, what do you mean she got shot? I was like, oh my gosh, like I haven't told him yet. Like, it's a can of worms. Now I got but that's kind of my perspective with when it comes to like sharing the whole situation.
Yeah, I look at it too as, excuse me, I look at it too as, you know, you're gifting people the opportunity to know those deep details about you, and not everybody is worthy of that.
Absolutely.
You know? And so it's a gift that you give to them, and so the people that you share that with, they need to be people who receive it that way. Like, wow, she's trusting me with this information. You know, she's trusting me to learn, you know, the depths of who she is and her experiences. And so I look at it as deciding who to gift that to and who not to. So, but yeah, you're right. I'm sure that Constance has had experiences with me talking out of turn on things, and she hadn't had a chance to talk to people about it. But
yeah, for sure, it is a common shared experience when it comes to that, Katherine.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to just open this question up to everybody. Why do you think that people abuse? And again, like I said in the very beginning of this podcast, it's a very nuanced thing. It can be anyway. There's no cut and dry, in my opinion. You know, there's no like, this person is going to be an abuser, you know, because they may not be.
Yeah, I think that Katherine is an amazing example of that, because, you know, you hear about all of the ways that children are impacted from witnessing domestic violence in their home. And, you know, and there are a lot of effects and a lot of choices that kids would make from coming from domestic violence homes. And so I think that Katherine is an amazing example of, you know, how you can actually soar. You know, you can use it to catapult you to something like great. So I'm very honored to know you.
Thank you.
We've talked about this. We talk about this a lot internally within our house. But why don't you, honey, talk about the skills that you developed from being forced to be so independent and how that served you well? Because yes, this was a horrible thing that happened to us, but it also cultivated a skill set that we've both in different ways have been able to use to an advantage. So
Yeah.
I'll let you talk about that.
Well, and it's, I formed the skill set, but it wasn't from a place of having a skill set. It was more of a survival mode. So I remember being young, and after everything happened, my brother and I would get ourselves up for school every day, and we had our own alarm. There was nobody coming in to wake us up. Like if we were going to get to school on time, that was up to us. Especially when we moved to Texas, I remember making my own lunch every day. Like at 8 years old, I'm making my own lunch and putting everything together. I'm getting myself up every day to go to school. I'm getting myself dressed every day. And I started getting myself dressed in kindergarten because my mom was healing. So pictures from that era of my life are quite something, because I put myself together as good as a 6-year-old can. So I started learning how to do those things. And some things stuck very naturally to me. I knew if I wanted to get the grades to potentially be successful down the line, that was up to me to get my homework done. There was no one breathing over my shoulder to make me do my homework. That was up to me. If I wanted breakfast, then I needed to get up and make myself breakfast. If I wanted dinner, I need to figure out what I'm going to eat for dinner. And it was usually like a tub of ice cream, if I'm being honest. But it was up to me. And so those skills, they were very hard, especially growing up where a lot of kids had stay-at-home moms, and the moms would come to school and they would eat with them, and they would bring them these spreads, these elaborate meals. And my mom was working and she couldn't do that. And the moms would write handwritten notes to their kids when they would have their lunch. And I remember I used to write myself notes, so I didn't feel like I was left out, because everybody else had handwritten notes from their parents, but I didn't. So I would write my own notes so that I would have something to look forward to when I would eat lunch. And so at the time, those skills were really hard for me. It was just a survival thing. But then once I got to high school, and ultimately once I've gotten to college and I just finished my first year, there's certain things that I developed at such a young age that kids now, I'm like around them and they're like, I don't know how to do my laundry. And I'm like, y'all haven't been doing your laundry since you were 7? Like, I did my own laundry like all the time. Like, granted, I probably never did it right, but my clothes are clean. So like I hear some of my friends and they're like, yeah, like I don't know how to do the dishes. I don't know how to cook for myself. I don't know how to do the laundry. And although I learned those kind of forcefully at a young age, I'm grateful that I know how to take care of myself. I know how to make my own food. I know how to hold myself accountable. I understand my actions have consequences. If I don't do my homework, I don't get the grades. If I don't get the grades, I don't get the scholarship, and all of it's just all of those different things. So yes, it was very hard. It was not always fun. It was very unfortunate a lot of the times. But at the end of the day, the skills that I have now, and the reason why, a lot of people, I'm able to serve as an ambassador for the university and I'm able to be on these groups and be involved, is because I learned how to time manage and I learned how to do all of these things, where a lot of people now are just now figuring out that these are skills that they have to have.
Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. You're amazing. But speaking of, the children's perspective, or protecting children, because, in that instance, it was survival for you. Protecting children when they experience or witness domestic violence or domestic abuse, you can definitely help children feel safe by talking to them about their fears, talking to them about healthy relationships, definitely talking to them about boundary setting, and helping them find reliable support systems and getting them professional help. And I think sometimes that can be well, probably all the time, can be challenging if you are the parent who is experiencing the abuse, trying to share what healthy relationships are, or setting healthy boundaries are for your children when you're not then doing that for yourself. But if you're, definitely able to work through that, that's something that is a benefit to your children to know. Stephanie, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, and in all honesty, it's hard because I know I haven't set a good example. And so it's hard to know how to course correct and give them the right examples and the right guidance as they go forward in life and they become young adults. I also think that, I have 4 children and 3 boys and, Katherine, and each one of them, their path, their road to healing has been very different. Some have fared better than others. Some have been more open to therapy than others. Therapy is a hard thing for me because my husband had a therapist that enabled his mental problems. And he was kind of on their payroll for 8.5 years. And at the time of his death, he was addicted to prescription medicines, abilify, Lamictal, Lexapro, Klonopin, and Cymbalta. And he had been on Prozac, Zoloft, Effexor, Ritalin, Risperdal, you name it, whatever he wanted, he was able to get. And when I would reach out to his therapist and I would say, look, he hadn't gotten out of bed at all, but 3 times in the entire month of December, we've got to do this. They hid behind the shroud of HIPAA and I had no voice. So I have this love-hate relationship with therapy because it did not serve our family unit well when my husband was struggling. So a couple of the things that I do believe when it comes to, I've got strong convictions on this, and they may not be the right convictions, but they're my convictions, is you have to want to be better, and you can provide the resources for your children as well. And the kids all had therapy early on, but I think as they've matured and grown to be young adults, they have a better definition of what the specifics are with their healing. And I think that's a journey that they have to discover. It's a journey I'm still discovering. And you have to I think it's very, very important that you know what you want to achieve from therapy. Yeah. Again, my husband went to therapy for 8.5 years, 3 and 4 times a week at $270 an hour cash pay. So I know my children kind of have a very different perspective on therapy and the benefits of it. I know I'm a little jaded with that. And I do believe that my approach to healing was to buckle down and just do better after I got to a certain point, and there would be times when I would set boundaries for myself. Okay, I'm going to cry. I'm going to be depressed. I'm going to do this till Sunday night, 10 o'clock, and on Monday morning, I'm going to get up, go to work, start over, buckle down, and have a fresh start. So that was a lot of the, I guess, how I tried to cope. And that was how I tried to raise my children. Again, I don't think there's any right answer. I think if they would have had therapy for 8 years, it would have served some well, and others maybe not so well. There's no manual for this.
Right. I think, part of it too, just in listening to you explain that, is that you know, some people have a problem speaking truth to power.
Mhm.
And the more prestigious that they see their client, they become more intimidated and shy away from speaking truth. So I think it's important to find, it's kind of almost like them working for him instead of him working, you know.
Absolutely.
For her. And I think that that it's important to find a therapist that, you know, can speak the truth, whether you like it or not, whether you want to hear it or not. I think it's important to find somebody who really has your health and healing at the forefront over even keeping you as a client.
And from my personal experience, weeding through all of the noise to find that person is such a laborious exercise. It's so exhausting. And each time you get a new therapist, you got to start from square one. And there's a point where, is this beneficial too, right? Is this worth it? Again, I don't know the answer. I know Katherine and I've had conversations where she wishes she had therapy, more therapy. And, I kind of just throw my hands up in the air because it's a really, it's a tough call. And I also think, and again, this is from my experiences with my husband, when the mental health industry, we all say we need more awareness for mental health. Well, I think we all talk about awareness for mental health, and I think we're all aware. I think we have awareness coming out of every crook and cranny within our life. It's not the awareness. It's for me personally, when my husband would go and see his therapist and he would say, my wife's the problem, my mother's the problem, they're doing this to me, they're doing that to me. And there's no checks and balances in the system. When the caregiver doesn't have a voice, again, I mean, there was this huge wall. And then he would come home and he would be abusive to me. Well, my therapist says it's this and it's that. And living through that made me very wary and very cautious. And again, I know this is a very unpopular perspective.
Well, no, it's a perspective through your lens and your experience.
It is.
And
I know I'm not alone. There's other people that I've talked to, other women that have been in a similar situation that have a very similar viewpoint. I mean, I have a friend in Illinois who has a doctorate, I think it's a doctorate in social work, and she works in middle school administration. And in the state of Illinois, if you are younger than 14, the child has to sign a waiver that that the parent can have access to the mental health records.
Wow.
And I at first didn't believe this, and I confirmed it. And this was several years ago. I assumed that law is still on the books and in place. My 14-year-old boys didn't remember to flush the toilet or load the dishwasher. Why do they have carte blanche power to alienate the parent? Now, I understand there's cases where there's parental abuse and a child needs protection from that. I understand why that law is in place. But from my experiences, the laws governing therapy, counseling, mental health, I just didn't trust them. So.
Thank you for sharing that point of view. I mean, it is an individualized thing, and some people may share your same perspective, your same viewpoint. Other people may find that therapy or talking to the children about these types of things are beneficial. So it is an individualized thing. But thank you for sharing how it affected you, and I'm really sorry that was your experience.
Yeah. And
Kat, you have a whole different perspective.
I have the complete opposite perspective from my And we've talked about this a lot, but to kind of paint the picture too, and we talked a little bit about like the long-term effects of growing up in an abusive situation. And when I was young and after everything happened, I was fine. I mean, I didn't have any anxiety. I was a pretty happy-go-lucky kid. Like that didn't really change. But when we moved to Texas, about a year into moving to Texas, I stopped sleeping. I wouldn't sleep. I couldn't be in a room by myself. I couldn't be in a room that was dark. I would stay up every single night and until the sun came up, and then I would sleep for an hour, and then I would wake up and go to school. Just because of everything that had happened, I just couldn't sleep. My brother and I both had 2 twin beds in our room. So I had 2 twin beds and he had 2 twin beds. And he's like the best, and he would let me go and sleep in his room so that I would get sleep. And I did that for months because if I was in a room by myself, I couldn't sleep. And I had gone to my mom about it, but I don't think she understood just how severe this was. And so that was kind of the start. And then I went to middle school, and once I got to 5th grade and 6th grade, I mean, I was a completely different kid. I didn't talk to anybody. I had no friends. I was so shy. I didn't hang out with anybody because I had no friends, because I didn't talk to anyone. And I started having severe panic attacks multiple times a week. I just started really living through everything that had happened up into or back when I was young. And I was really reliving it for years. And, you know, I wouldn't watch certain movies, and certain things would trigger me. And I couldn't always predict the triggers, because it was like when I saw a movie theme then, or when I saw a movie scene, then I remembered something that happened. So it wasn't always just blood. It wasn't always just a gun. It was these little things that I remember happening when I was young, only after I saw something that triggered it. And that was all of middle school for me. And that was terrible. And I remember not feeling like I could go to anybody, or anybody would understand it, or I could get any help for it, because everybody's problems were always bigger than mine. And that's how I felt. And so I knew therapy was not one of those things that was very celebrated in my house, I guess. And so I really, 10, 11, 12 years old, I was throwing my hands up in the air. I was like, I don't know what to do. So for years, it was just, I really didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to talk to. No 12-year-old, like, can't go to a 12-year-old about this.
Yeah.
I couldn't go to teachers. The teachers at my school that I went to was a great school, but they liked the kids who they'd known for years. Their students had older siblings, and they knew the family. They lived in the same neighborhood. So I was very much pushed to the side. I remember at one point I had told these boys had Googled my name for some reason, and they found out about what happened. And then I was eating lunch in one of the teachers' classrooms, and they were in there, and they searched up a music video that had scenes of a shooting in it, of a real school shooting in it. And they were like, Kat, what do you think about this? With the teacher in the room. And it was situations like that. And I was like, there's nothing I can do. Like, I threw my hands up in the air, and I was like, I'm going to feel like this until I don't feel like this. And so once I got a little bit older, once I got to sophomore, junior year of high school, and things started turning around significantly for me, I kind of was like, I wish that somebody knew what I was going through, because it was horrible. And I just didn't know who to go to. And it was hard because, you know, my mom and I are very, very close, but I didn't want to be a burden. And even if I would have told her, I didn't know what that would have led to, because therapy wasn't something that was very celebrated. So I really didn't know what I should have done. And so obviously I got to the other side of it, but that's been a conversation that's come up recently in the last few years. Because she didn't know how bad it was, but I didn't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that, excuse me, that level of anxiety when it hits you, you know, and sometimes it takes that to almost propel you to seek out a therapist to help, because you don't know. And I mean, I was, gosh, how old was I? I was probably, I don't know, maybe 24, before I first sought out my first therapist. And it wasn't because I thought, oh, it seems like that might be nice to talk it out. It was, I was on my way home to traveling to North Carolina from Florida, and knew I had to make that 10-hour drive and go and spend time with this family who I've experienced abuse from, and play the role, smile the smile, so nobody knows and nobody thinks that, that there's anything, wrong, and that everybody can hold on to their perception of what your family is. And, I got in the car and I was like, okay, I'm going to have to pack up things. Me and Constance packed up. And literally, it was like paralyzing. I literally couldn't do anything. And so, it was just me and Constance here in Florida. So I just opened up the phone book and went to the first name. It started with an A. And I thought, I'm going to have to call until somebody's going to help me get through this, because I don't know I don't know. And so I called the therapist up, and she didn't have any space to see me, but she talked to me for about an hour and got me to a place where mentally I could handle the anxiety and stress, and to get me to a point where I could just move forward. And then I started seeing her when I got back, and I realized that that's something that I wish I had benefited from earlier on, because I think it would have molded me in a way sooner than it did. So I mean, I feel you.
Exactly. Well, and it was hard too, because at the time I started feeling all of these different things, there wasn't anything that was really going wrong. It was all of these, like, I knew what the cause was, but I didn't understand why I was feeling the way I was feeling at that moment, because it had been years later. It'd been 5, 6, 7 years later. And suddenly I'm having all of these panic attacks. Suddenly I don't know how to communicate with people my age. It's all these new feelings. I'm not happy. I cannot get myself out of bed. I can't function like I used to be able to function. But there was nothing wrong. I wasn't actively being in a house with abuse. I wasn't actively seeing bad things. And so that was something that was also just so confusing, because it's easy to pinpoint something when you can see something's going wrong. But I think a lot of times, especially kids who grow up with this situation or similar situations, it's hard to understand that the lasting effects are truly lasting effects. You want to leave it in the past, you want to get past it. But I mean, to this day, it still affects me. It affects my relationships. It affects the people who I talk to. I'm in a sorority at Alabama, and we had a police officer come and talk to us. And he was just explaining different scenes that he had seen, and had a panic attack in probably months, if not years. And he was explaining what he'd seen at a suicide, and just the words that he was saying and the way he was explaining it. It was during chapters. There's about 200 girls in one room while this police officer is talking. And I immediately knew I was about to break down. So I got up and I ran out of the room, and I called my mom, and I was like, I'm having a panic attack. I don't know what to do. And the thing it was horrible in the moment, but I was also I felt a lot better, because I had girls now who were texting me, and they noticed I left, and they noticed I got out of there, and they were like, are you okay? What's going on? What can we do for you? And that was so different than what I had in middle school, where I would leave the classroom and nobody cared. No, the teachers didn't care. The students didn't care. And so, although it was terrible, it showed me the growth from at one time I had nobody, but now I know. I was able to call my mom when I had panic attacks in middle school. She had no idea. So it was one of those monumental things. It was like, it's terrible and it's a lasting effect for sure. But at least as I've gotten older, I have found people who care and who are there to support me.
Yeah. Thank you.
Is healing is not a linear process. There's nothing linear about recovery at all. You can be just tootling along, having the best year of your life, and then bam, you get sucker punched and you're kind of, you know, gone backwards and you're healing. And I think for me, what's been very frustrating in my own family is shooting took place 13 years ago now. And yes, I'm thankful. I've rebuilt my life. I have a wonderful career here. My kids for the most part are rocking it in life. Our story could have turned out very, very differently, but we do have these hiccups. And it's not like you fall off your bike, you skin your knee, you put a Band-Aid on it and it goes away and you never, think of it again. And I think there are people within my inner network that don't have an appreciation that healing from this kind of trauma is a very different journey.
It's very different.
Not a band. You can't put a Band-Aid on it and it goes away. It just doesn't happen like that.
Right.
And so there's a lack of sensitivity sometimes, especially for survivors, especially with those that we love and that love us. There's a lack of sensitivity in how they deal with us, and a lack of respect, I think, of what our journey is with in recovery.
Okay.
Yeah, so this has been such an eye-opening discussion, and we feel so honored to have Stephanie and Katherine with us. And stay tuned for part 3. See y'all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.